Awaken your spirit, chosen ones. The moment you stop being predictable, you stop being ignored. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. When people can't read you, can't categorize you, and can't explain you using their usual mental shortcuts, curiosity doesn't stay innocent for long. It mutates, it sharpens, and sometimes it hires help. There's a documented reality behind this. Most private investigators aren't hired to catch criminals. They're hired to reduce uncertainty. Businesses use them, families use them, even friends of friends use them. Not because a crime happened, but because someone's story didn't line up neatly enough to feel safe. And that's where you come in. You didn't do anything illegal. You didn't threaten anyone. You simply moved through life without following the expected script. Your progress didn't come with receipts. Your confidence didn't beg for approval. Your decisions didn't ask for consensus. That alone is enough to short-circuit people who rely on predictability to feel in control. When explanations fail, investigation becomes the coping mechanism. What really unsettles them isn't that you're secretive, it's that you're selective. You don't overshare, yet you're not hiding. You don't perform transparency, yet nothing about you feels fake. That contradiction messes with people. It makes them feel like they're missing a page in a book everyone else seems to understand. And no one likes feeling behind the plot. So instead of asking you directly, which would require vulnerability, they outsource the curiosity. Background checks, quiet inquiries, digital footprints combed like crime scenes. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're unresolved in their minds. You don't fit the pattern they use to relax. And yes, it's darkly funny when you think about it. Somewhere, someone paid money just to figure out why you don't behave like everyone else. Imagine budgeting for rent, food, and understand this person as a line item. This isn't about ego. It's about psychology, power, and the uncomfortable truth that when you operate outside expectations, you become a question people are willing to pay to answer. Number 1, you exit environments cleaner than you entered them. Most people leave traces behind them without realizing it. Emotional residue, loose words, unpaid social debts, awkward tension. After they pass through a workplace, a relationship, or a group, there's usually something to clean up. Apologies, explanations, damage control. You don't do that. When you leave, there's nothing to sweep under the rug. No one can point to a mess and say, "That was because of you." That's unsettling to people who are used to chaos being the proof of participation. In their world, if you were truly involved, something should be broken. Someone should be upset. A rumor should be floating around. Instead, everything looks strangely intact. You didn't burn bridges, but you didn't camp on them either. You crossed, collected what mattered, and kept moving. What really messes with people is that your cleanliness doesn't come from being passive. You spoke when it counted. You set boundaries. You made decisions. You just did it without theatrics. No raised voice, no emotional spillage, no oversharing your inner world like a public diary. That makes it hard to tell where your leverage was or how much influence you actually had. So after you're gone, people replay interactions with you like surveillance footage. They start asking each other what they missed. Who did you talk to? What did you know before everyone else did? Why does nothing feel damaged, yet something feels different? Clean exits leave behind a quiet paranoia, because they remove the evidence people rely on to feel superior or justified. There's also a practical fear buried in this. If you can leave without consequences, it means you weren't dependent. And if you weren't dependent, you had options. Options scare people who rely on control through attachment, obligation, or guilt. Your clean exit exposes how fragile those tools really are. Eventually, curiosity turns professional. Not because you caused harm, but because you avoided it too well. People start looking for the mess they assume must exist somewhere else. Surely you slipped up somewhere. Surely there's a footprint they just didn't see yet. But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. You moved through their space with intention, not hunger. And that kind of presence leaves nothing behind, except questions. Number 2. Your life has visible gaps that don't align with your outcomes. People are used to seeing the whole movie now. The struggle arc, the failure montage, the late nights, the motivational captions. Progress is supposed to come with proof. Sweat needs witnesses. Pain needs timestamps. When someone skips that and still shows up with results, it quietly breaks the agreement everyone thinks they're following. Your timeline doesn't add up. There are stretches where nothing public happens. No updates, no explanations. Then suddenly you're ahead, better positioned, calmer, sharper. Not loud about it, not apologetic either. That's when suspicion kicks in. Not because people believe you cheated, but because they can't locate the effort. And when effort is invisible, they start assuming it was hidden on purpose. What makes this worse for them is that you don't rush to fill the gaps. You don't backfill your success with stories to make others comfortable. You don't say, "Here's what I went through to earn permission to stand where you're standing." You let the silence stay. That silence becomes a blank space people project their fears into. Some assume privilege, others assume connections, a few assume manipulation. Very few assume discipline done in private because that explanation doesn't satisfy curiosity. There's also a social threat buried in this. If outcomes can exist without performance, then the performance itself feels pointless. People who built their identity around being visibly busy don't like that idea. Your gaps suggest that effectiveness doesn't need an audience, and that hits too close to home. So they start retracing your steps without you. Old posts, old associations, who you knew before, where you disappeared to. They look for the missing chapters because the ending bothers them. It challenges the belief that everyone must suffer publicly to earn progress. The real discomfort comes from this quiet realization. If you could do it without broadcasting, then maybe they didn't need all that noise either. That thought stings, so it gets redirected outward. Investigation feels safer than self-reflection. In the end, your gaps aren't suspicious because they're empty. They're suspicious because they're productive. Something happened there, just not where anyone was watching. Number 3. You're connected to people who don't claim you publicly. There's a strange power in the invisible network, and you're living it. People notice when someone important or influential seems to know you, talk to you, or respect you, yet doesn't flaunt it. No public endorsements, no selfies at events, no boasted affiliations, just quiet connections that exist outside the spotlight. That alone makes others uncomfortable because they rely on visible proof to measure influence, authority, or relevance. If it can't be seen, it can't be trusted, or at least that's what they tell themselves. The tension arises from control. People are used to mapping the world through associations. Who you know matters because it signals power, status, and opportunity. When you move in circles that remain unseen, it disrupts their mental map. They can't predict your reach, your timing, or the way your network can affect outcomes. The uncertainty gnaws at them because humans aren't comfortable with variables they can't calculate. You don't amplify these connections because you don't need to. You're not performing loyalty or influence for validation. Your relationships exist for utility, trust, or alignment, not for optics. And that refusal to perform makes people feel insecure. They wonder what's happening behind the curtain, who whispered what in private, and why you seem untouchable without announcing it. It's also subtle intimidation. When someone influential doesn't claim you publicly, it signals autonomy. You don't require approval. You aren't dependent on recognition to advance or survive. That alone triggers curiosity, and often paranoia. People assume there's a strategy they're missing, a maneuver they can't read, or an advantage you're holding close. Eventually, the unseen connections become a mystery worth investigating. It doesn't matter that you haven't done anything wrong or manipulative. The fact that others can't map your social ecosystem makes them uncomfortable enough to dig. Background checks, inquiries, or subtle probing start creeping into your life, not because you're guilty, but because your quiet associations reveal a form of power they can't understand, measure, or control. That's why invisible connections can unsettle even the most confident observers. You're not loud, not aggressive, not performative, and yet your presence in spaces that others can't see feels like a riddle they feel compelled to solve. Number 4. You're not where you're supposed to be based on your background. People have this unspoken expectation that life follows a script. Where you come from dictates where you should end up, and every visible factor, family, education, social circle, financial starting point, is meant to predict your trajectory. When you show up somewhere that defies all those expectations, it sends shockwaves through the people around you. They can't reconcile your position with the story they've constructed, and that makes them suspicious. It's not just about success, it's about presence. You enter spaces, roles, or situations that should have been off limits according to their logic. You speak with authority in rooms where people assumed you would never belong. You move with confidence where the odds, by conventional measures, were stacked against you. And because nothing about your journey was broadcasted or performed for validation, people start filling in the blanks with their own assumptions. The discomfort comes from envy, fear, and insecurity all mixed together. When someone from a background that shouldn't allow this level of competence or access suddenly rises, it challenges the belief systems of everyone around them. It forces them to confront their own limitations or mistakes in judgment. Instead of seeing it as personal growth, they interpret it as a threat or anomaly that must be explained, mapped, or contained. That's why investigations start. Not because they expect you to have broken rules, cheated, or hidden dark secrets. They start digging because your reality doesn't match the narrative they've been told about how the world works. They want the missing pieces. They want an explanation that restores their sense of order. Your presence in these wrong places triggers curiosity, unease, and often obsession. You've demonstrated, without effort or announcement, that the rules people rely on to feel secure aren't as absolute as they believe. And when their mental map of reality is challenged, they don't just sit quietly. They investigate, seeking to make sense of what can't be easily explained. The truth is brutally simple. You're not where they expect you to be, and that alone is enough to make people uncomfortable enough to watch, track, and try to understand your every move. Number 5, you don't react the way manipulators expect. Most people operate on predictable triggers: pressure, flattery, guilt, or fear. They expect these levers to work, to bend reactions in their favor. When someone doesn't respond as expected, it creates confusion, frustration, and often obsession. You don't over-explain, over-defend, or overreact. You simply move with a quiet certainty that signals control without performance. That lack of response is like a mirror reflecting back to them their own inadequacy, and it makes people uncomfortable in ways they can't articulate. Manipulators thrive on feedback loops. They push, prod, and provoke because human responses confirm their influence. You break that cycle. You're calm, deliberate, and unshakable in situations where others would react instantly. You don't give away your strategy, your feelings, or your boundaries for anyone to exploit. That unpredictability doesn't feel safe to people who rely on control or leverage, and when they sense it, their curiosity turns into investigation. They start watching, probing, and tracking because they need to understand what keeps you grounded where others wobble. What makes this unsettling is subtle. It's not loud, it's not confrontational. It's a quiet refusal to participate in someone else's drama or power play. That level of self-possession is rare, and people interpret it as something to decode rather than something to accept. They feel exposed because their usual tactics don't work. Their influence evaporates silently, leaving them scrambling for answers. This doesn't just protect you, it shifts the dynamic entirely. You hold the emotional map, the situational awareness, and the timing. Others, expecting friction, excuses, or overreactions, find none of it. That absence becomes a vacuum that demands explanation. People start searching for evidence, digging for motives, and trying to map the internal mechanics that make you immune to their control. Your unshakable composure doesn't just leave an impression, it leaves a question. If typical levers don't work on you, what does? And that question is powerful enough to make them hire someone to find out. You don't need to act mysterious, you just need to exist consistently outside the expectations of manipulation. Number 6. You never chase validation from authority figures. Most people instinctively look up. Bosses, leaders, elders, anyone with influence, they seek approval, recognition, or at least acknowledgement. It's a social reflex. It's how the majority navigates hierarchies, whether at work, in communities, or even within families. You don't play that game. You operate on your own terms, measure your own worth, and make decisions without waiting for anyone's stamp of approval. That alone makes people uncomfortable because it breaks the rules they assume everyone follows. Your independence doesn't come across as arrogance. It comes across as untouchable certainty. You respect authority when it deserves respect, but you never inflate it to fit your life or manipulate it for leverage. That leaves people around you confused, especially those who are used to control or influence through recognition. They can't use conventional levers to guide or predict your behavior because you don't respond to them in the expected way. There's also an underlying tension that authority figures feel in your presence. You don't need their validation, which means their influence over you is limited. That threatens their sense of order, because power, for most, is a two-way transaction. They give approval, you give compliance. When you remove that exchange, they're left with a puzzle. How did someone achieve results, gain respect, or command attention without ever asking for it? Curiosity and discomfort follow naturally. People start analyzing your interactions, studying your behavior, and trying to figure out the how behind your independence. Private investigators get called not because you're doing anything illegal, but because your autonomy feels like a blind spot, a variable they can't calculate. Your life becomes a case study simply because it operates outside the expected patterns of deference and submission. By refusing to chase validation, you don't just maintain control over your own decisions. You create a space where your competence and influence can't be easily measured or contained. That kind of quiet power unsettles others more than overt aggression ever could, and it's enough to make people start paying attention in ways you might never see. Number 7. You seem informed without being plugged in. There's a subtle kind of power in knowing things before most people do, especially when it doesn't come from obvious sources. You show up in conversations, decisions, or situations with insight that feels almost premonitory. You're aware of shifts, trends, or opportunities without broadcasting where that knowledge came from. That alone makes people uneasy, because it's impossible to trace, quantify, or challenge. When others try to measure influence through networks, appearances, or gossip, you operate outside all of it. Your awareness isn't loud or performative. You don't need to announce the early intel, and you don't use it to one-up anyone. You just apply it quietly, strategically, and effectively. That silence is deceptive. It makes people suspect that your understanding comes from hidden channels or connections they aren't allowed to see. It triggers the kind of curiosity that turns into investigation. Because humans don't like uncertainty, especially when someone seems one step ahead without visible effort. It's more than just having information. It's the timing and the application. You act with precision, in ways that make outcomes look natural or inevitable, rather than forced. That creates a blind spot for observers. They can see the result, but can't map the process. They can't tell if it's skill, luck, or insider access. And when someone can't categorize your capability, suspicion starts to replace assumptions. People are drawn to understanding patterns, and when they can't find them, they feel compelled to dig. They begin tracking associations, retracing steps, checking digital footprints, or asking questions quietly. You've unknowingly become a subject of analysis, not because you're doing anything secretive, but because your presence defies predictable patterns of influence. The irony is that your intelligence and foresight aren't threats. They're simply misaligned with expectation. The discomfort people feel around you isn't about competition or malice. It's about not being able to decode your actions or anticipate the next move. That unpredictability is exactly why others go to extreme lengths to understand you, often hiring people to track what seems untrackable. Your quiet awareness turns into a puzzle they feel they must solve, and that makes your life simultaneously impressive, untouchable, and unsettling. Number 8, your boundaries cost other people money, leverage, or control. Most people underestimate how threatening quiet boundaries can be. Saying no is simple on the surface, but when your no disrupts plans, halts opportunities, or redirects resources, it becomes a problem for those who expected compliance. They budgeted influence, calculated leverage, and assumed control. And then you arrived without breaking a sweat, just holding the line. That's disarming. Your refusal isn't aggressive or performative, yet it shifts outcomes, alters timelines, and sometimes even reroutes entire strategies. What makes this particularly unsettling is that your boundaries aren't random. They're intentional, consistent, and rooted in self-respect. You don't negotiate your values for comfort or convenience. You don't bend for favors or flattery. Every boundary is a measure of your autonomy, and that autonomy can cost others more than they realize. Deals that should have been predictable fall apart. Opportunities they thought were guaranteed evaporate. Influence they relied on diminishes quietly, without anyone being able to blame your words or actions directly. People notice this, even if they don't admit it. They feel the loss before they understand it. When a plan derails or a dynamic shifts, the invisible hand guiding it back to stability is always you, simply because you refuse to compromise for their convenience. They start questioning, analyzing, and retracing steps to figure out how someone so unobtrusive could carry so much silent power. This is why investigators get involved. Your boundaries aren't visible in emails, meetings, or social media. They manifest in results, failed expectations, disrupted strategies, and questions about what went unseen. Observers can't trace the exact moment influence was lost, only that it vanished, and that's unsettling enough to trigger scrutiny. The real truth is brutal. You don't need to manipulate, scheme, or overtly challenge anyone to be untouchable. Your presence alone, combined with clear, uncompromising boundaries, reshapes power dynamics in ways others can feel but can't control. That quiet cost you impose is enough to make people curious, suspicious, and willing to pay for answers they can't reach on their own. Number 9. You don't behave like someone afraid of consequences. Most people live their lives running scenarios over and over in their heads, calculating outcomes, weighing risks, and adjusting behavior based on fear of backlash. You don't. You make decisions and take action with a clarity and calm that signals you've already faced the worst and accepted it. That doesn't mean you're reckless. It means your focus is on reality, not reaction. And that kind of fearlessness unsettles people more than aggression ever could. When someone operates without the constant shadow of consequence, they break the invisible rules everyone else lives by. People expect hesitation, over-apologies, or visible anxiety when stakes are high. You don't provide that reassurance. You move, speak, and act with a quiet authority that defies their assumptions. That discrepancy makes observers paranoid because it suggests there's something they don't see, a preparation, a strategy, or access to resources they can't measure. Your calm is a kind of unspoken power. People notice it in meetings, in negotiations, and in interactions where tension usually dictates behavior. They expect defensiveness, yet they get composure. They expect panic, yet they get patience. That contrast triggers a subtle alarm. Humans instinctively probe anything that doesn't behave according to predictable patterns, and your lack of fear creates exactly that pattern of unpredictability. The danger for others is that they can't contain or influence you the way they usually do. Your life isn't ruled by their expectations or pressures, which means their control is limited. That makes them curious, anxious, and eventually investigative. Private inquiries don't happen because you're doing something illegal or shady. They happen because your fearlessness exposes how fragile others' sense of control really is. You don't need to boast, threaten, or manipulate to be disruptive. Your simple refusal to bow to fear or anticipated consequences changes the dynamics of any environment you enter. It leaves people unbalanced, questioning, and quietly compelled to dig into your life, searching for reasons why you aren't like them, why you move without hesitation while they remain shackled by imagined outcomes. That unshakable presence is magnetic, powerful, and unnerving all at once. Number 10. You disappear at moments when exposure would benefit you. Most people crave attention at peak moments. They post, they perform, they ensure that everyone knows they were the one behind the success, the idea, or the breakthrough. You don't. You vanish. You step back, stay quiet, and let the momentum exist without your immediate presence. That absence isn't negligence. It's intentional, it's strategic, and that strategy unnerves people because it goes against every predictable pattern they've learned about visibility, recognition, and influence. When you withdraw at the exact moment that would benefit others' perception of you, it creates a gap in their understanding. They notice the results, the change, or the ripple, but they can't see the origin in real time. Your timing leaves a void they feel compelled to fill. That void becomes fertile ground for speculation. People start connecting dots that may not even exist. They search for hidden steps, unseen collaborators, or secret maneuvers. Your absence transforms into intrigue, and when intrigue meets uncertainty, curiosity often turns into investigation. Your silence at critical moments signals something deeper. Control. You don't need constant validation or applause to operate effectively. By disappearing when everyone expects you to perform, you force observers to reckon with the fact that outcomes don't require your public presence. They rely on visible effort as proof of value. You prove them wrong without saying a word. That challenges their assumptions, their authority, and their sense of predictability. It also amplifies your perceived power. When people cannot track or predict your presence, they begin to assume capabilities or influence that might not even exist. The human mind hates unresolved patterns, and your selective visibility leaves them unsettled, questioning, and actively trying to map what they cannot see. Ultimately, disappearing at strategic moments makes you unknowable in the ways that matter most. You are present in impact, but absent in the expected form. That contradiction, success without announcement, influence without visibility, is exactly what triggers deep curiosity and even drives some to hire investigators. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your quiet, intentional absence feels like a mystery they feel they must solve. Number 11. You don't need to prove intelligence, yet people feel outplayed. Intelligence is often measured by performance, presentation, or dominance in conversation. Most people feel the need to showcase it, to assert it, to constantly remind the world that they're capable, sharp, and ahead. You don't. You don't broadcast your knowledge, quote statistics, or correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to impress anyone. And yet, despite your quiet approach, people leave interactions feeling subtly off balance, like they've revealed more than they intended, like they underestimated something invisible. That's the kind of intelligence that unnerves observers. It's silent, unannounced, and impossible to quantify. What makes this unsettling is the control it implies. You don't dominate conversations, yet you shape outcomes. You don't flaunt your skill, yet your insight changes the way decisions unfold. People sense it instinctively. They can't measure your mental processes, so they start to question themselves. Did I miss something? Was that intentional? How did they arrive there before me? When someone operates this way, others feel compelled to dig, to observe, to map every detail of behavior. The mind doesn't like untraceable competence. It wants a roadmap, and when none exists, it resorts to surveillance. There's also a psychological sting here. Your quiet brilliance exposes others' performance-based intelligence. People who talk, argue, or prove themselves for validation suddenly look smaller, insecure, or reactive by comparison. Your presence demonstrates that intelligence doesn't require noise or approval, and that reality is threatening to anyone who built self-worth on being seen as smart. Because your intelligence manifests subtly but effectively, it becomes a blind spot that people can't leave unresolved. They assume there must be hidden methods, secret strategies, or unseen advantages. That assumption drives investigation. It isn't about catching wrongdoing. It's about understanding how someone operates without needing the validation everyone else chases. Your quiet mastery unsettles the predictable. You don't prove intelligence because your results, timing, and understanding speak for themselves. And that, in a world built on visible validation, is more than enough to make people curious, suspicious, and willing to dig where they feel blind. Number 12. You're difficult to place emotionally. Most people operate in predictable emotional patterns. They get angry when provoked, anxious when ignored, or excited when praised. It's comfortable, measurable, and easy to anticipate. You don't work that way. Your emotional responses are subtle, controlled, and deliberate. You're not cold, but you're not easily swayed. You don't broadcast your feelings, yet you're not detached. That balance, a presence that feels real without being readable, leaves people uncomfortable because it breaks the scripts they rely on to navigate relationships. Your unpredictability isn't reckless, it's intentional. You give just enough to connect, but not enough to be controlled. People can't manipulate you through guilt, flattery, or expectation because your emotional signals aren't open books. That makes you simultaneously trustworthy and enigmatic. Observers are left guessing, constantly analyzing whether your calm is neutrality, strategy, or hidden intensity. That uncertainty creates tension, and tension fuels curiosity, the kind that leads people to watch, track, or even hire someone to understand you better. The discomfort comes from control, or rather, the lack of it. When someone cannot predict how you will react, they feel exposed. They realize that their usual tactics, manipulation, persuasion, subtle pressure, are ineffective. You don't validate, you don't overreact, and you don't seek approval. You simply exist within your emotional boundaries. That level of self-possession forces others to confront the fact that influence over you isn't automatic. It has to be earned, if it's possible at all. People tend to fill emotional blanks with assumptions. When they can't read your loyalty, attachment, or thresholds, they start mapping your interactions, replaying conversations, and trying to decode your patterns. It's why investigations happen. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your emotional autonomy challenges the way others feel safe, measuring, predicting, and controlling outcomes. You're difficult to place emotionally because you've mastered the space between presence and privacy. That skill disrupts assumptions, defies expectations, and triggers curiosity. You leave people unsettled, not through drama, but through the quiet authority of your self-contained emotional landscape. It's subtle, invisible, and incredibly powerful. Number 13. You don't build your identity around any single group. Most people define themselves by the groups they belong to, their workplace, social circle, community, or ideology. Those affiliations act as a safety net, a roadmap for behavior, and a source of validation. You don't do that. You move through spaces independently, borrowing insight, influence, and ideas without merging your identity with them. You're present, engaged, and capable of collaboration, but you never let any one group fully claim you. That independence